it feels very weird. I was looking at these testimonials saying that it's easy to say this once you've gotten a score,
Yeah.
but for someone who's transitioned from looking at those videos and using that as a source of motivation to push myself to being here, I think definitely trusting the process worked. My verbal was always the area that I was not good at, and that kept pulling my scores down. There was last RC, I think the fourth RC, which was I think 4 or 4.5 paras long,
Hmm.
and that was just a pain to get through. And I think that came up about the 18th or 17th question.
So, hello everyone. Today we have Salavadeshwar with us, who has recently got a 695 on their GMAT Focus Edition with a fantastic quant 86, verbal 83, and 84 on data insights. This is a phenomenal score. So, let's hear from him how exactly his journey went, what issues or what troubles did he face, and how did he overcome them, right? So over to you, Saladeshwar. Take us through your journey. But before that, what are you feeling right now? How is it since everything is done? What are you going? What are the set of emotions you're going through?
Honestly, yeah, I'm definitely very relieved knowing that, my GMAT is done with. That's, as most people say, the first and a very hard step in your MBA journey. I'm very happy to have gotten the score. Relieved, yeah, mostly those two emotions.
Makes sense. And so, first let's go through your whole journey, right? So there would be a number of challenges that you would have faced across quant, verbal, DI, right? I think you even mentioned that you got 12 mistakes and still you got a 695 on your score, right? So what are those problem areas that were really giving you the trouble, and how did you really overcome them? If you can give a broad perspective on
Right. So, speaking for myself, I know that I was always pretty strong in quant. My verbal was always the area that I was not good at, and that kept pulling my scores down.
it.
So even for this focus edition, I know they had removed geometry, but I still did revise geometry because it might come in handy for coordinate geometry and so on.
Right.
Uh, so my quant was always there, so not something that I was worried about, and I look forward to solving those problems. But the entire opposite with verbal, right? Sentence correction not being there was definitely helpful because I couldn't keep in mind all of the particular, modifiers and things like that. I felt like I was decently good at RC, and time was my issue. I had always been able to understand the crux, the primary purpose of what the argument states. And that helped answering the questions, but I needed a lot of time when it came to a longer passages. And this was very evident in the diagnostic mock as well as the top 1% mocks. So my RC, I was never able to complete the verbal section, which I was very scared of. Uh, but fortunately, the GMAT was not as hard as the mocks given by the top 1%,
Right.
specifically verbal. And I think more so not in terms of the actual difficulty of the problem, but the length of the questions, right?
Hmm.
How much you have to go through and maintain composure and actually be able to complete that. So that is with respect to RC. Given the time I was able to do it, I was always around the 75th, 80% accuracy in RC, even hard questions considered. But CR was a bit of a problem for me. So I was able to get a few questions very quickly, very straightforward, because intuitively I was able to identify that this is what the argument has as the base, or if I were to remove this, the argument would fail. So I
Makes
was able to easily identify that for some of the questions. But there used to be this problem set that I consider that I would do it today, I would go wrong, I would understand what and how the right approach is to solve it, come back to it after a month, and I'd still get it wrong.
okay.
So those were some of the problem areas that I faced, specifically critical reasoning. Some definitely, yes, first time I get it right, no problem. But some that I just never could kick off the bat. I just didn't know why. But that way, I think top 1% where it helped me is I think the volume of questions.
Hmm.
Um, I am confident that I have not even completed 35% of the entire syllabus.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that is mostly pertaining to verbal because
Hmm.
quant, I definitely did solve the 700 to 800 questions, and that is a game changer, hands down.
Right.
If you get the 700 to 800 level questions in quant, in the course in the curriculum that's offered, GMAT quant is going to be a piece of cake.
Okay, that's interesting. So you said that the timing was an issue for you, and getting, making mistakes repeatedly, same mistakes after a amount of time. So I think
Right.
those are very common problem areas that students face. But before we move on to how you cater to them particularly, you said you did it with volume, right? But before we
Mm-hmm.
move on, actually, let's go a bit into DI. So this is a section that people are very scared of, right? It's
Right.
considered to be this mystery section, which has a lot of caveats and a lot of problems for everyone. So, how was it for you, particularly?
So to be honest, I did not do as much DI as I was supposed to.
Okay.
Um, and the reason is because I gave the exam on, I think, Feb 16.
Hmm.
But Jan 1 to Feb 16 was primarily just verbal intensive. And I
Right.
think 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks before the actual GMAT exam was when I started with my DA prep.
Makes sense. So, when you say that you did not do that much on like that, I think, do you mean that you did not do the course itself, or just the practice? You went through the material, the preparation bit, but the practice you were not able to do as much as you wanted, maybe.
Right. So I had done the pre-work. I'd obviously watched the 4 videos, the basic
Right.
videos, and I'd
Right.
solved some questions. That was done. Obviously, before even completing the pre-work, I wouldn't go to book the test.
Makes
So I got that out of my list. But the post-work, I think I did not do as much.
right.
But what gave me confidence was the fact that I was thinking most of the problems will be quant related, and quant as a section I consider myself to be strong in.
Makes sense.
And the other part was CR. And also, because I am in the data analytics field, I thought my ability to interpret charts, graphs, and see meaning from images and pictorial representations was to an extent already above average. And
Makes
I think essentially that's what worked out in the exam as well.
Right. So from a concept perspective, we talk in DI particularly, let's say IR, since it's all about analytics per se. So how did you find the concepts that Sandeep taught to be like how helpful were they to you?
Absolutely, definitely 100% helpful. Um, Quant specifically, I had made a notes list.
Right.
So I had listed down the important formulas that are required. And the same thing, even right, I made notes of Octave also.
Hmm.
So I think both of those help. I think one thing that really helped me with time, both in the quant section as well as the DA section, was the DS 436.
Okay. Okay. Right.
So I had completed all the 436 questions, and um, that was super helpful because my average time to solve DI questions was DS questions, data sufficiency questions was less than, I think, a minute and 40 seconds.
That's impressive. On that particular exam day, right? It would have been a stressful day for sure. So take us through that experience. How did it start? How did it go through for you completely?
Right. So it's my first time I was taking the focus edition and first time I was taking it outside of India. So I had moved to US for work last year, and it was definitely new experience. The first thing that caught me off guard was, you were given these extremely bulky noise cancellation headphones,
Yeah.
and the moment I wore them, I could hear my heart beating. Entire world was silent, and
Wow.
I could just hear my heart beating, and I could know that I was, tensed, and that I was definitely I needed to be calm and maintain composure in that 1.5 2 minutes that you get in the beginning slides,
Yeah.
in order to proceed. And then I think as and when I started seeing the questions, it was okay. One relief in verbal was I saw a boldface question pop up,
Okay.
which sort of made me realize that okay, maybe I'm on the right track for verbal.
Hmm.
But again, I think what sort of made me commit 5 mistakes in verbal is there was a last RC, I think the fourth RC, which was I think 4 or 4.5 paras long,
Hmm.
and that was just a pain to get through. And I think that came up about the 18th or 17th question.
Makes
So
sense.
17 through 22, I think I was just 17 through 21 questions. I was just pacing, trying to get it done so that I complete the test because that's penalized and much more harsh than, getting things wrong.
Hmm.
So that was running in my head. And I think that's where I get the test get a little better of me and sort of faltered on those questions.
Makes sense. So you need to be prepared for everything, right? A lot of students say that C passages are short on the GMAT, things like that. That's not completely true. You have to be prepared for everything per se, so that on the
Yeah,
exam day, nothing is a surprise. Right.
mostly it's short or like medium,
Yeah.
but if you do keep getting that, at least in my case, the last one, the fourth and the ultimate RC para was is extremely
Yeah,
as
obviously.
long as let's say Winter's Passage.
Yeah. So as if you're doing good on the initial questions, you are at a good level, they will obviously challenge you with more difficult stuff. Makes sense. So there's one another question which is quite common among students. So I know that you're a working professional, right?
Hmm.
People find it difficult to juggle between work and their exam preparation, everything around it. There's a lot of stress involved. So how did you manage that? How many hours did you put in? So give us a picture of that.
I was doing the pre-work very religiously. One really important thing that I must say is um, whenever I felt down, right, the initial few sets of videos about similar testimonials
Yeah.
really kept me going. And I'm so glad that even though I wanted to get started on the course, I did not skip that
Hmm.
because whenever I had a bad day or streak of bad days, I would just tell myself it's worked out for so many people who put in the effort, and it's a matter of time, and we shouldn't give up. And I think really that helped me stay positive.
Makes sense.
And I would urge anybody who's taking up this course not to skip that section unless of course you have already booked the GMAT and you have like barely any time for the exam.
Makes sense. So I think, as you said, that you were motivated by some stories, some others will be motivated by your story as well, right? So there's this chain reaction going on over here, and I can safely assume that a lot will go right after this. So you mentioned mocks. Now, top 1% mocks are scary, right? A lot of students
Yeah.
come to us saying that they got bad results, and I think almost all our students come and say this, that on the first few mocks they got some really disappointing results, and later, as they gave more mocks, it sort of improved. So was that the same for you? What was your experience with the GMAT mocks of top 1% particularly?
So I gave my first MBA official mock after I'd done all the pre-work and gotten a little bit of sectional practice.
Right.
I scored a 705 there. And at that point in time, I didn't know what a 705 meant because only after that did I actually go into comparing what a 705 meant on the older GMAT.
Right.
And I felt quite happy about it. And then I gave the diagnostic mock and scored, I think, a 685 or a 695 in that,
Hmm.
which sort of made me realize, okay, I'm in that region, not in the 99 percentile yet, but somewhere around 98, 97. So
Yeah.
a little bit more effort. And I knew DI and verbal, I need to push a little bit more. So let's get that out of the way.
Makes sense.
And then I gave my first mock, ended up with a 645. So I was like, I convinced myself saying, okay, it was probably, not my day. I
Yeah.
was tensed, did not manage time effectively. And I took 2, 3 days break. Definitely was studying through then, practicing, but not giving marks. Gave
Right.
another mark, ended up with a 635.
Makes sense. What are you
And
feeling at this point? What were you feeling at this point when you got to 645, 635? What were you going through?
so I just told myself, okay, I need to really sit down and look at what went right in the exams. That's
Right.
most probably going to go right in the actual exam.
Makes
And
sense.
what didn't go right is probably not going to go right. And like I said, I was barely finishing the DA section. I
Hmm.
think even though the questions might be pretty straightforward, you have to read so many things, like especially multi-source reasoning. You can't afford to skip out on any section or take a call that this question is only from this page,
Right.
because you get one question wrong, you get the entire one wrong. So my DS, I was barely finishing, sometimes not finishing. Quant was okay, but verbal again, I was not finishing.
Makes sense. So what I understand is that, it those two mocks give you a good measure of what you're going wrong with, right? Even in tough times, let's say you're doing really well on your exam and you had some tougher questions to face. That is when those mocks really prepared you for, they calmed you down. They got you in that sense. Okay, this has happened to you before. It's just okay, it's fine, you can manage it out, right? And another thing which I also believe is that the one thing that you did was picked yourself up right after getting those scores. a lot of students get distorted. They sort of lose their composure, which is natural to happen, but something that you have to control when you're giving such a high stake exam and you're in such a situation, right? Makes sense.
Right.
So one thing you like repeatedly said, one problem which I really want to dive into is time, right? Uh, I don't know of a single student who has not struggled with this. Almost all of them do. Even I myself did back in the day. So what worked for you? How did you manage your time? Did you actively put effort behind it? And what exactly did you do to get through the problem?
So I know that there was this split of, by fifth question, sixth question, you got to have this time left.
Yeah.
Um, I did not use it for any section.
Okay.
So the way I went about it is quant, I was always finishing ahead of time. So that wasn't an issue. In fact, what's funny is in my GMAT test, I had finished all the questions and I had marked 3 questions for review. And I knew I was going wrong in those three.
Right.
So because I hadn't given time, I knew that at the like 30 seconds in, I knew I needed more time.
Makes sense.
So I went back to the review and corrected one question. And after that, I had 10 or 9 minutes left
Hmm.
after completing 19 questions correctly, and I didn't know 2 questions. I knew I was going wrong.
Hmm.
I had 9 minutes left.
Okay.
So I tried getting, I thought, okay, let's spend 4 minutes on this, 4 minutes on that. And I knew I tried to get an answer for the 20th question, and I thought I was right. So I moved on. And
Hmm.
I spent solid 8 minutes on the next question,
Yeah.
and I still couldn't crack it. I don't
Okay.
know if it was pressure. I don't know. Maybe I could crack it now. It's just on the exam day I couldn't.
Right.
So, and the score report revealed that those 2 questions were in fact what was wrong.
Right. Makes.
So, yeah, that is one. In verbal, I used to look at it after having completed an RC,
Hmm.
because when I used to check in the middle of the RC, right, the first question is going to have such a bloated time because you're reading the para,
Hmm.
and that didn't give a true estimate. So I used to have checkpoints like, let's say, 23 questions, I'd check after 9, I'd check after 15
Hmm.
and see if I had time. For DI, for the most part, I didn't even check because,
Right.
and I was like measured in my approach of how I went about going from one to the other. In DI, if I didn't know something or if one section was I knew I was not going to be confident. I just skipped the question, marking a random answer and
Right.
focusing on things that I can actually get right.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So from this whole journey, right, I'm sure you would have had a lot of realizations, a lot of do's and don'ts, which you would have had in your at the back of your mind. So would you mind sharing those with the rest of the people? Like they might benefit from the same.
Don'ts, I'm not quite sure what it is, but do is definitely like rigor, practice. Quants, I think the way I approached it was I knew quant was the stronger section. So I wanted to make sure that every single thing with respect to quant would go my side.
Right.
And in DI knew the graphs, I had not done much. So I wanted to reduce the time as much as possible for data sufficiency.
Makes sense.
So that was my approach. So I think you need to figure out what your strengths are and play according to that. Make sure you do maximize on your strengths and do bare minimum to get to your weaknesses so that you're still getting a 75-80% accuracy on whatever the second is. So that is one. It's very easy to say like to be determined and all, but human emotions, it just takes over. And I just kept going back to those videos from time to time and trusting the process.
Hmm.
It feels very weird. I was looking at these testimonials saying that it's easy to say this once you've gotten a score,
Yeah.
but for someone who's transitioned from looking at those videos and using that as a source of motivation to push myself to being here, I think definitely trusting the process worked.
Makes sense. So with so many do's, we can expect one don't. Like let's just anything that you can think of.
I think it'd be the same thing I said as do, just don't take a shortcut. Like you might try to get some things right or skip something, but you don't want that to be one question that's pulling you down. Even if you make slower progress, I think doing it steadier and slower is better than um, doing fast, but like plateauing at a particular level of accuracy.
Right. So, be steady, be patient. It will happen at the end of the day, right? So,
It will, yeah.
yeah, great. So,
And I think one great thing about this particular focus edition is you don't have to say which schools you have to apply to before you give the test. So depending on how your test goes, you can always choose whether or not to make the scores visible to the schools. I'm not aware of whether the schools will still have visibility into knowing how many attempts you have given in the focus edition, but I think it's still a little bit better than the older edition.
makes sense. You get to make a choice after you get the score. So, that's something for you, right? Makes sense. Cool. I
Yes.
think a lot of students will get a lot out of this, I'm sure. And, it's always helpful for someone who has made it to help someone out who is yet to do so. And I'm sure a lot will do because of this video. So, what are your plans now up ahead? What next are you going to pursue?
I plan to apply round one this year, so I'm trying to get my resume, trying to get better at the job so that I can get some letters of recommendation, and
Makes sense.
try to overall do some profile development and network with people who are here, who are currently in schools,
Right.
to understand which schools are better suited for me and for not just my GMAT but also overall profile, and see which school is a good fit.
Makes sense. So you haven't really, do you have any prospective schools in mind where you want to go? Any like broad level thoughts at this stage?
So right now, I'm targeting all of the top 15 schools
Right.
in the US, with the exception of maybe INSEAD.
Hmm.
Um, Aside of that, I haven't zeroed down on definitely these schools I'll apply, but I'm definitely considering Columbia, Stern, Haas, Johnson, Marshall, Darden, because I'm from a consulting background.
Makes sense.
So these schools, yeah.
Right. Well, I think a lot of students will get a lot from this, as I said once again, and we wish you all the best on your journey. Right. And
Thank
yeah,
you so much. Thank you so
that's all
much.
about it. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys. All the way best.
Yeah.